Hello, everybody. Welcome to this next fascinating conversation in the Melting Pot forum series in 2020, online, of course, because we can't do that. So tonight, next year, 2021, we'll see the 50th anniversary of one of the most famous and controversial psychological experiments ever. The Stanford Prison Experiment showed how people given a position of power, and in this case it was students who were given the role of prison guards, would use that power against those in a weaker position, even if they were fundamentally good people. And it raised the question, would any of us, any of us be both good or bad given the situation we're in? The man behind that experiment has gone on to develop further work that shows how exactly that, the situation people find themselves in, can be the most important reason for their behavior. Until that, his work, there was always a focus on the individual personality of those involved. Now, the man I'm talking about is Professor Philip Zimbardo, and he's also the person behind a non-profit organization that promotes heroic behavior. I try to make ordinary people into heroes, and we'll hear about that too this evening. But Philip, welcome to Melting Pot.
Welcome, Stuart. I'm happy to be here with you. I wish we could be in person.
Yeah, indeed. Lovely to see you from the west coast of the States, from San Francisco. So let's start all those years ago, 50 years ago next year. Just summarize for those that don't know, what did the Stanford Prison Experiment show you?
Yes. So on August 14th, 1971, began the week-long study. Should I talk a little bit about the study or the conclusion?
Yeah, explain the study briefly, if you would, but it's the conclusions I think were very important.
Yeah. So the study, for those of you who don't know, and it's available online, prisonexp.org. It has all the material about the study. It was designed to go for 2 weeks, but we had to end it after only 1 week because it had gotten out of control. The study used college students from all over the United States who happened to be in the San Francisco Bay Area, finishing up summer school at Stanford or Berkeley. And they answered an ad I put in the local newspaper, wanted college students for a study of prison life. That's all it said. Today, and we have to be available for 2 weeks. We interviewed 70 applicants, and we picked 24 who were the most psychologically healthy, physically healthy to begin. So that's really critical. The starting point is normal, intelligent students and psychologically normal. And then we randomly assigned, half would be guards, half would be prisoners. So it also means the guards are not, at the beginning, more sadistic. They were the same as the prisoners, but then we put them in different uniforms. And that's really critical. The guards had military-like uniforms and symbols of power, a club, handcuffs, whistles, and the prisoners were put in smocks with a number sewn on their smock. And they had to become the number. They gave up their identity, their names, and they became, in the study, a number. There were 3 prisoners in each of 3 cells and 3 backup prisoners, and there were 3 guards that each worked 8-hour shifts. So the prisoners lived there 24/7. The guards worked 8-hour shifts. And I tried to make it, even though it was a simulation, it was in the basement of the psychology department. And it was not real prison, of course, but we put cells with manufactured with doors with bars on them. But the study began by having the local police arrest each of the boys who were going to be prisoners and bring them to the police station, do formal booking as if they were, fingerprinting, take their photographs, put them in a prison cell. So we wanted to start with a powerful jolt, which we did. And then the study began when all the prisoners were in their cell. The conclusion is, of course, that it's really a classic demonstration, as you said, of the power of social situations to control individual dispositions.
Nicholas, we can hear you, so can you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you. Sorry, carry on, Philip.
Yeah, so it's a classic demonstration of the power of social situations to dominate and distort individual dispositions. Before that study, the assumption in psychology was that what's inside of you determines how you behave, whether you're a narcissist or a sadist, whether you are a gentle or kind person. And what the study showed is that social situations, especially powerful ones, can dominate the personality. So in our study, we measured personality, they said, and personality predicted nothing. That is, people who are on the opposite end of any personality scale behave the same in that situation.
So there were no individual personality factors at all in the way people behave, not at all. That's interesting.
I think, as I recall, it's a long time ago, I think there was just one. Boys who were assigned to be prisoners who were high on authoritarianism. They endured the prison experience best. They were the ones who didn't break down. They were the ones who lasted. So it's a funny kind of negative prediction, is that if you are somebody who admires authority, then when you're even in a position of low authority as a prisoner, you're more likely to go along with that scenario.
Now, the prison guards in that were able to inflict pain on, or believed that they were able to inflict pain on the inmates, on those who were prisoners. Is that right? And how did that play out?
No. So the rule was, when we began, we had all the prisoners, all the guards come together, and we described what was going to happen. You're not allowed to use physical punishment. You're not allowed to hit prisoners. But that's all I said. I didn't say you can't use psychological force. I didn't even mention that. So at the beginning of the study, there was an uprising on the second day where the prisoners rebelled, and then and there was physical confrontation between the hit the prisoners, take some of them, strip them naked, put handcuffs on, put them in solitary confinement, which is a closet. But then after that, I said, no physical punishment. And actually, the psychological punishment they applied was, in the long run, even worse.
Wow. Just to pause for a moment, Philip, because you broke up a couple of times there. You kind of froze on us. And I'm just checking with my colleagues that we're okay to carry on. What did you feel, guys? We okay? Nicholas? Well, I'm going to take silence as assent. Okay. So now there has been controversy about the experiment in the years since then. What do you say to those who question the findings of the experiment?
Yes, there's always been a lot of controversy about my research, but all the Milgram research, the research by Stanley Milgram, which preceded my experiment by 10 years, and his study was on blind obedience to authority, where individuals, but his study used older men, ages 20 to 50, and they were put in a situation where they were supposedly helping people improve their memory by shocking them when they made an error. And of course, they were put in a situation where the person they was trying to teach was a confederate of Milgram's, and he kept making errors, and they kept shocking him more and more. So in Milgram's study, 2 out of every 3 men gave 450 volts, which is the maximum possible, which was enough to make people knock them unconscious. And so his was the first experiment where people suffered psychologically. And then mine followed up on his, because in his study, it was really just one authority and one person, and one subject. In my study, it was a group phenomena. And so all these studies were criticized. Now, what I did when I finished my experiment, I wrote some small articles in scientific journals, but then about 5 years later, or 2004, I think, I wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect. And I have 10 chapters in that book out of 16, going through the great detail of what happened in a prison experiment. And when I finished writing that, I deposited all the material we had in the Stanford, and they digitized the thing, all the videos, all the audios, all the written transcripts, and it's available to anybody. Anybody can go to the Stanford archives and say, I want to see Zimbardo's prison study. And so people who've criticized my research, they criticized it based on what I gave them in the experiment in the Stanford archives. And what I did is, they say, we discovered such and such. They discovered what I gave them. And so I recently wrote a 20-page rebuttal, taking each criticism and say, here's what the criticism was, here's the person who was the critic, and here's now the truth about that. Right. And so I was able to dismiss all the critics.
Well, let's move on from that, but
okay.
More importantly to the conclusions, because if you take those conclusions from, if you like, an extreme situation, a prison situation, into ordinary life, can we explore how ordinary people, maybe even people who are normally good, can suddenly behave badly, and if you like, proving what you're saying? What are some of the examples where you see that on a day-to-day basis?
Let's see.
For example, the police. I think you mentioned to me that someone puts on in a uniform. How does that change them, for example?
Yes. So the uniform is a starter. Is that putting on so that was the transformation in our study. When students came down, there was a guard's quarters. They took off what they were wearing and they put on their uniform. And amazing, I'm sorry I didn't videotape that room, because some of the guards later said, when you put on the uniform, when you have the billy club in your hand, when you have the handcuffs, you are transformed at that moment, and that you become a guard. And so, but the same way, if you are in the police, if you are in the military, so once you put on a military uniform, the object of being in an army is to destroy an enemy of your nation, enemy of your state. Now we're having a big problem in America now with the police brutalize and killing civilians, in many cases black men, actually black women. So there's a whole movement in America, Black Lives Matter, in response to the police shooting a black person like 10 times or 20 times, who's not the police were in danger. And again, it's when you look at American police, they look like soldiers going to war. They have helmets and big guns, belts filled with bullets, tear gas, and essentially they're supposed to be there to protect the community. And now in many places, the police are hated, that certainly in minority communities.
So is there evidence that in other police forces, for example, I come from Britain, our police are not armed, they don't carry bullets, they don't even wear anything on their heads anymore. They used to wear helmets, they don't anymore generally. And they do everything to look unintimidating, to look, just like they wear a uniform, but it's not a military style uniform.
Right.
is there any evidence that that changes the behavior of the people who then become police officers?
You know, that's a great example. I mean, in the UK, the police have never worn the American kind of military uniforms. And as far as I know, there's relatively little evidence of police physically abusing civilians. Now in America, I think it's when the police put on that whole gear, and it's not just a blue shirt which says, you know, police department 42. It's that whole entire gear. So psychologically, you're going to war, but you're going to war not against an enemy, a foreign enemy. You're going to war against people you are being paid to protect. So that's the paradox, and so it means when you go and there are police departments within any big city. There are police departments that have a scope of authority that is maybe several miles around the police station, and you're there really to protect those people. You're there to help them in an emergency. If they get robbed, if somebody gets run over, if there is gangs fighting, but
the point being that with the uniform on, they behave differently. Yeah, because you've just frozen on us, Philip. I'm sure you'll come back in a second. Sorry for everyone watching. Philip, just stop a second, because you were just freezing for a moment there. But I think we got the point there, that the uniform changes their behavior. What I want to say.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So two things I want to say to those watching. If you're watching this live, then please do feel free to put in a question in the question and answer section, and we'd love to hear from you, or in the chat. We'd love to hear what you've got to say. We'd love to hear any questions or thoughts or comments that you have. If you're watching the recording, of course, unfortunately you can't do that, but you can put a comment, I think, below the video. But let's talk about other situations. So, for example, there is a lot of evidence, I think, that people in social media, when writing in social media today, because they are in a situation of being anonymous, behave differently. What's your observations about that? Suddenly, I'm not wearing a uniform, but I might adopt a personality online that may not reflect my normal personality. What's your observation there?
That's a really good point, Stuart. I did earlier research before the prison study on anonymity. When you make people feel anonymous, and this is, we did research just putting a hood over them, that anonymity makes them give up their usual disposition, their usual personality, and they will do whatever is appropriate in that situation. So we did earlier research that shows college student women, when half of them had hoods on and half had no hoods, and they were put in a situation where, again, they could shock another woman if she made a mistake. The ones who had a hood on gave twice as much shock and twice as high a level than the ones who were not. So here now it goes from men to women, and it was simply being anonymous. Now, social media, what we're seeing in social media, people saying awful things about each other because you have the anonymity, that it's this powerful instrument. You have this cell phone, which it can be like a gun, that you can hurt people in terrible ways, vilify them, make up stuff that is not true, because you know, before anybody gets all the evidence to show it's not true, their character has already been, in quote, assassinated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what are the lessons from this, Philip, in terms of how we can change behavior? And I'm very interested in this. We have in our country a lot of interest in what's called nudge, which, for those that know what that word means, is where you do little things and it changes the behavior of people because it pushes them gently in a different direction than they would otherwise go. And now, so I'm interested in what your recommendations are. How can we, for example, make people behave better? Or how could we alternatively create situations where they behave worse, whatever their personality?
Well, we don't want to create situations that make people behave worse. I mean, we have enough of that with the military, with police everywhere. But we want to create situations which bring out the best in people. Now, we have organizations like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and Optimist clubs. We have whole groups in almost every nation which try to change, make children behave better, to be prepared, to be a good scout. Now, I took that to the next level. 10 years ago, I started a nonprofit foundation called the Heroic Imagination Project, or
HIP.
And the whole goal of this Heroic Project, what?
Sorry,
you
froze. I completed it. I completed it for you. I'm sorry, you froze.
Okay. So this organization is designed to make ordinary people better. That is, to teach them lessons in psychology about how to stand up, speak out, and take action to make the world better for some other person. And we actually teach them how to do it, not simply say it's good to do it.
Okay, well, at that point, let's pause. I'm going to play a little cartoon of you explaining this. And then when we come back after that, we'll talk about the things you can do to encourage that behavior. And I say again to people watching, please, we'd love to hear from you. In Czech, you can write a question in Czech, in English, in Japanese. We've got translators. We'd love to hear what you've got to say. But let me share this cartoon with you. It's only about a minute long. So let's just share that now. And you should all be seeing that. Let's watch this cartoon. Oh, I'm going to share that again, and the sound. Oh, I have done. I am that good. I've shared the sound too. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Philip Zimbardo, president and founder of the Heroic Imagination Project. Our main focus is promoting the idea that heroes are ordinary people who take extraordinary action in challenging situations in their lives. Effective heroes do the right thing when other people are doing the wrong thing, or more often when they're doing nothing, and also to expose evil in all of its many forms as a whistleblower. We believe heroism begins in the mind, begins with thinking about yourself as a hero, thinking about yourself as having an inner hero that we will help express through our lessons, our ways of rethinking the nature of good and evil. Transforming bystander apathy into heroic action. Bystander apathy is what characterizes what's known as the bystander effect. In emergency situations, the more people present, paradoxically, the less likely anyone's to help. That's called the bystander effect. It was generated many years ago by the brutal murder in New York City of the woman Kitty Genovese, where many people heard her screams and did nothing. As soon as one person helps, then in seconds, that help is expanded. Our message is be the one. Be that person who ignores the social norm of doing nothing and creates a new social norm of doing something.
Fascinating. So let's understand how we can create the situation, the circumstances to ensure that people behave in that way. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so our program is not just talk. I have created a number of lessons, psychological lessons, that go like 3 hours long with videos and Q&A, where I'm leading young people. We started off with high school students, and now we're going to middle school students, and now we're going into business. So we give them material to think about, material to interact with each other. So it's not just saying be good. We show situations where, let's say in the bystander effect, situations where somebody is hurt and a crowd gathers around and no one helps. And then we show what happens when somebody goes over and picks them up and say, hey, are you okay? Suddenly a second person comes. So we use my lessons to teach people around the world. We're in 12 different countries, our HIP program, how to be an effective hero. An effective hero simply means breaking through the apathy of doing nothing, of being an observer, to be a participant in life. And your focus is, what can I do to help someone else? And then change that into action. So you need the thought, I could make a difference, but the thought is not enough. You need the social action of actually doing something.
So if in society, assuming not everyone gets that training, what are the ways in which we can create the right environment or the right situation, the opposite, if you like, of the prisoner experiment, so that people are more likely to behave in that way and less likely to not do anything?
Well, again, we have to use the situations that we have. We have schools which are designed to teach children schools are the training ground, creating everyday heroes. Religions, most religions also have Sunday schools for the children participants. So we have to say, what are the institutions in our city, in our country, where people go in order to get some kind of training? What I'm saying is, some of that training now should be how to be an everyday hero.
Right, in school. But you talked about uniforms before. Are there so for example, I was thinking when you were talking about that, of a lot of the, if I think about parts of London, the people that walk around that look like they could do harm are wearing a uniform. They're wearing a hoodie on their head. Now, they may be perfectly innocent, nothing wrong with them people, but they have a uniform that is in common with those that actually might do harm. And firstly, is that true? Is there the kind of uniform of violence that people might adopt to copy others? And secondly, is there an opposite that one might think about?
Yeah, but again, the hoodie is a good example. I mean, there are gangs. I mean, in many, many cities and many, many countries around the world, typically young men organize into a gang. Now, sometimes the gang is there, to steal, to sell drugs, to do bad things. Sometimes the gang can be protecting their turf against other gangs. But when you're seen with this hoodie, and you might also have an insignia of your gang, that it identifies you as somebody who's willing to engage in
it's carrying violence.
And now, on the other hand, I don't know if you have it in Czech Republic or in London, the Salvation Army. People in the Salvation Army wear a uniform, and I think it's usually blue.
Started in London, Philip. It started in London, just so you know. It started in London. Philip, Sergeant Booth started it in the 19th century.
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you. But again, so here's a case where you put on that uniform, and it's usually a blue and red. Those are two colors.
Black and red. I think they wear black or dark blue. Yeah,
dark blue and red. So here's a case where when you see somebody dressed like that, they are there to do good, to help, to try to do good, to collect money for the poor. That's one of the things that they've been doing.
So it can work both ways. So you can have a good uniform as well as a bad uniform, in other words.
Yeah. Uniform gives you an identity. So we don't ask, what is your name? When you see when somebody's collecting money for, let's say, for Christmas. I think in America, the Salvation Army comes out on the streets like before holidays, and they have a big pot. You throw money in, and they're going to give it to poor people to have a better Christmas. So you don't, as a civilian, you don't say, before I throw the money in, what is your name? You might say, what part of the city are you going to give the children this money to, et cetera, et cetera. So it works both ways.
That's interesting. We've had a question from one of our viewers, and the question is, he says, or she says, I believe being a hero, as you put it, is oriented for the benefit of others. Now, how do you help people distinguish between selfish heroism and unselfish heroism? So, for example, if, in fact, they've said, I would guess Mr. Trump considers himself to be a hero on behalf of the American people. I think our questioner thinks this is very selfish kind of heroism, if you like, narcissistic heroism. How do you differentiate between narcissistic heroism for my ego and real heroism?
That's a great question. Really, really good. Is that it's not enough to say I am a hero. So Trump is the kind of person who says I am brilliant, I am smart, I do good things, and then so the important thing is, what is the behavior that emanates from that person? What is the evidence that they have done something which makes the world better in some way? And narcissist, beyond Trump, he's one of the most extreme instances of a narcissistic personality. But beyond that, it's really, what is the evidence that this person has done something which makes the world better for one other person? So teachers can be heroes. Now, one definition of hero, though, is not simply somebody who does good. It really is, you're in a situation where you're trying to help someone, and there could be some threat to you. That is like, so in the bystander situation, there's always a possibility of some negative consequence to you for helping. But again, it's so this gets over the whole, and now we have classic heroes, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and many, many more. So these are people who organize their entire life around helping, around doing good, and they become identified as a symbol of let's call them classic heroes.
Yeah, there is a value judgment there, though, Philip. This is the interesting thing here. So, for example, Gandhi, a lot of people are now questioning whether Gandhi was a good guy, because actually he had a very low opinion of Africans when he lived in South Africa, even though he did amazing things for Indians when he lived in India. So was he a hero? And the other side of that is Adolf Hitler. I don't think many of us would think of him as a hero, but I bet a lot of Germans at that time felt he was a hero, saving Germany, as many of them saw it, from desperate times. And so, in other words, there are different value judgments. You may have a view that Trump is not a hero. You don't like him, clearly. There are many Americans who think he is a hero, right. And there's no is there an objective truth there, or is it all subjective, is the point?
No, Stuart, it's a great, great point, is that clearly Hitler was a hero to the Germans at that time. He took them out of poverty, out of being disgraced after World War I, and gave them a new positive identity. Mussolini was in the same way. I'm Sicilian, and and I know people at that time. In America, they were fascist for Mussolini, and there were even some German fascists in America at that time. But it's really, and again, the example of Gandhi, that now all over America, people are questioning the heroes that we put on statues. And in many, many cases in America, it turns out they were supporters of slavery or had slaves. Lincoln, some of Jefferson, some of America's greatest heroes were either slave owners themselves or profited by slave trade. So essentially, behavior is complex.
Yeah. So the question. So the question I have is,
platform. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry, you froze. So I just tried to fill the gap. I'm sorry, but But the question I have there is it enough that you believe that you are doing something heroic, something that many other people will believe is not heroic, like the extreme examples we've just quoted? There is different people will have different views of Donald Trump as a hero. Different people have different views of Adolf Hitler horribly as a hero. In Czech Republic right now, some people probably see their president as a hero. Other people dislike their president a lot. So is it enough that you as an individual think, I am doing what I believe to be the right thing right now, and that is being heroic?
Yeah, that's a start to say, I believe that I'm doing good in some way, in every way, but it's like, but then the point is, what is your action? What are the actions you're basing that a conclusion on? And do other people agree? So that, again, if you're a narcissist, everything you do, you see as positive. But again, now in America, the big problem with Trump is no matter what he does, there are hundreds of millions of Americans who support him. I mean, right now,
he's a hero to them.
He's a hero. I mean, they wave flags. They go crazy. They go to rallies. They don't wear masks. They actually die for him because they go to rallies, sit side by side, no social distancing, no mask.
Yeah.
And and he says crazy. He comes out of the hospital. He has coronavirus now, and he says no big deal.
Yeah.
Coronavirus in America has now killed 209,000 people.
No, but back to the point. I'm sure you'd love to tell us how terrible Trump is, but the point is, you see them. The question is, he believes he's doing the right thing for America, and many other people agree with him, and many other people disagree with him. And so, I suppose that. And by the way, one point that's just come in on the chat is the saying, could the judgment be based on if the benefit of one group means the suffering of any other kind of people? In other words, should a hero be defined as someone who does nothing that harms someone else? I think that's what's behind that question. Would that be a way of defining that, do you think?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, is that people in America who were encouraged slavery, they helped many white people become rich, selling cotton and other things. But again, I think to be a hero, it has to be no one, and essentially no one suffers because of your deed, except if you're a military hero, you kill the enemy, and the enemy is arbitrary designation by your nation says we are at war against, and your job as a general, your job as a soldier is to kill the enemy or as many as possible before they kill you.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex, it's interesting and complex. Because it's complex, it's interesting to think about, the study.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. We just had another question in. Someone said that you mentioned HIP training in in military hero imagination project training in military schools. Can you give us more details about such courses? It's clear, this person says, that soldiers and policemen and women need such training, not only because of their uniforms. So not just because their uniforms are forced on, which I think they're saying that their behaviors anyway means that this would be really good to have in those places.
Yeah, no, we are trying to organize lessons in America for the police training academies. And you're right, it should also be in the military. So to do that. But if you want more information, you can just write to me, send me an email, and I will respond to send you examples of our lessons. So now you saw one lesson was the bystander effect. We have that lesson, and in that lesson, it's like 3 hours with videos and Q&A. But part of that, we can put in examples which are relevant to different countries, different types of individuals. And we have another lesson of developing a growth mindset, which opens your mind widely and suppresses having a fixed mindset. We have another lesson called bias reduction, understanding acceptance of people who are different from you. So each of these lessons, I say, goes 3 hours. We license them for a small fee, like I think it's $1,500 a year for 3 years. And also then I go around the world before the pandemic, and I train teachers how to use our lessons. And our lessons are now in Czech Republic, they are in Poland, they're all over Hungary, they're in Palermo, Sicily, and 12 nations around the world. And then we always do follow-ups. Does it change the behavior? We show bullying is reduced, pro-social behavior is increased. And so it's for me, it's been a godsend. I mean, it's my salvation from the pain I caused the prisoners in the prison study.
So just briefly, if people did want to contact you, how would they contact you? What would they do to contact you?
Or just send me an email, drzimbardo@gmail, drzimbardo@gmail.com.
drzimbardo@gmail.com. Now,
Right.
You talked about prisoners and army there. One of the very famous things you did was give evidence in the Abu Ghraib situation. And for those who don't know Abu Ghraib was an American prison. I think it was on the coast of Cuba, wasn't it? And the Americans, not Cuba?
Sorry, no, it's Iraq.
Oh, sorry, Iraq. I had the wrong prison. But Abu,
No,
thank you.
The other one is Guantanamo Bay.
Guantanamo Bay, I'm sorry, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm sure the same things happen there, but in Abu Ghraib, thank you. In Abu Ghraib, there was a lot of evidence that the American prisoners, soldiers who had prisoners who were accused or were ISIS members, other forms of terrorists, certainly as the Americans would see them, and many of us might see them. But the point is that there were a lot of soldiers convicted of being brutal and to the prisoners, behaving terribly to their prisoners. Now, Philip, do you want to just explain the evidence that you gave and why you gave it that actually helped defend some of those prison guards?
Yeah, so this Abu Ghraib prison is where American prison guards worked 12-hour shifts. There was a morning shift and an evening shift, because like in my study, only my guards worked 8-hour shifts. And their job was to simply contain the prisoners, see they don't escape. And the prisoners were being interrogated one at a time to see if they had any information they could give about terrorism in Iraq. Because American soldiers were being blown up and killed by random forces there. But what happened is, now curiously, it was only on the night shift. There's no evidence on the day shift at all, but on the night shift, the soldiers began to take pleasure in humiliating, torturing their prisoners. In fact, they took pictures of, they were so proud, they took pictures of them doing terrible things to the prisoners. They were proud of being sadistic. And I defended one guy, Chip Frederick. He was a staff sergeant. He was in charge of the night shift. And he was a really good guy, a good man, a good husband. He had won many medals. In another part of the world. And when he was put in this situation, caved into the norms of the situation, abused the prisoners, and take pictures of yourself abusing the prisoners. And they sent these pictures to other soldiers to say they were proud of this. And so somebody turned them in who saw these pictures. And Chip Frederick was put on trial, and we're going to give him 15 years in prison at hard labor, because once this evidence came out, it was humiliating to America because it made all the newspapers. And so I arranged to be his lawyer asked me, could I help him? So I actually had him and his wife come to my home. I spent a whole day with them, talked about his background, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was the expert witness in his trial, and essentially telling the judge about the power of situations, that before he got into that situation, he was a model soldier. And now after the situation is over, he's a model husband and family man. And I made the case that it was that evil situation that made him behave in evil ways, like the Stanford prison study. Right. And the judge reduced his sentence from 15 years to 4. Right. So he still served 4 years, but it's one of the few times that a psychological defense had a positive legal implication.
I have to tell you a little story about my own experience, and very different, but it illustrates it. I was shocked myself many, many years ago, and I was 17. I went to live on a kibbutz in Israel, which is a farm. Effectively, it's an agricultural settlement where people can volunteer and go and help. And I ended up working in the chicken shed, and I was a pretty nice young guy. So were all my friends, all the other people who were volunteers there. But once we're in this chicken shed and we were given the power over these chickens, and we had chickens shoved in our hands. We had to pick up 5 in one hand, 5 in another, put them into cages. Coming from a city, from London, my first response was complete horror, hatred, not only at the feeling of it, but the idea that I could potentially hurt one of these creatures, putting them into a basket. I was horrified by it. So was everyone else. Within a week, we were all just doing the job we were asked to do. And some people, and I was not one of these people, became brutal towards the chickens. They would kick them. They would abuse them. They would hit them. They would throw them around. They would be just almost go crazy in this situation. Now, I was shocked at myself. I was shocked at other people at how quickly we just conformed. We did what we were expected to do in that situation. Now I eat chicken, so therefore it's hypocritical of me perhaps not to behave that way towards chickens, because that's what happens, right? But nevertheless, it was interesting to me when I had absolute power over these creatures and I was told to behave in a certain way, I obeyed completely. It's interesting. Now
it's really, it's a great example, Stuart. But again, the next step is somebody's job is to cut the chicken's neck off, to kill them, so that and drain their blood, so that you can prepare them for dinner. And so again, it'd be interesting people to study, the people whose job it is to kill the chickens so that other people can eat them. And
you do it. If you had to, you do it.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to look at their transformation from somebody who you're simply assigned a role and you say, "Oh, I hate this," but you got to do it. And now again, in the Stanford prison study, go back, nobody wanted to be a guard, because again, the study was done in 1971 during the Iraqi War. And
Vietnam War.
And thank you for the question, is that students hated the police. The police were pigs. The police officers came on campus, at college campuses, where students were rebelling. And so I should add this in instead. Nobody wanted to be a guard, but once you got in the uniform, you loved being a guard. You loved that power. So power is the key. It's really, I think that's the message to take away. It's power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Sure.
There's lots of examples there. Now we're limited in time. We've had a couple of we're having great comments in the comments section. So one of the points someone's made is, I would guess the positive heroism is very closely linked to empathy and a sense of belonging. And the point they want to make is, or the question they're asking, how can we help to increase this empathy and sense of belonging in today's very individualistic, maybe even selfish Western society? And that's and now a uniform gives you a sense of belonging, doesn't it? That's one of the things the uniform does.
Yeah.
So how do you do that in a positive way for ordinary people is the question, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really a wonderful question. Is that now I would say, rather than empathy, I would focus on compassion. And now there is, in quote, compassion training centers. In England, there's a psychologist, Paul Gilbert, who has a compassion training program that I think you can apply to, and you can go through his program online, giving you a background how to build up your compassion.
No, but Philip, if I could just because of time, what I think is really interesting is not, I mean, there are very few people who will do that, you know, tiny number of people will do that. The question is, can we create the condition in society or in our physical, the way we design cities, the way we design transport, the way we design parliament buildings, you know, when people are discussing what to do, that changes the behavior, you know, that changes the way in which people interact, so that even if they're not consciously doing it, it's changing them. That's really the question, I think.
Yeah, but now we have the pandemic creates a whole new psychological vibe, namely social distance.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain human connection with social distance? You're not allowed to hug, not allowed to shake hands, you're not allowed to kiss, even family. So the pandemic is creating new psychological problems. Nobody's studying them yet, as far as I know, but it means it's more difficult to, let's say, if you want to have this in schools, it's more difficult to teach principles, these positive principles, when people have to be physically distanced. But I think the place to start is in schools. I mean, you start with examples, you start with cartoons, you start with stories that you tell. So like the Good Samaritan's tale, which is, you know, from the Bible, that you tell not only in Sunday school, but you tell in schools about somebody helping somebody who's a stranger when other people were passing by.
Now, you've raised the question there about the effect of COVID-19. So, as an expert in how situations affect behavior, what would be your? I know you haven't done an experiment on it, but if you had to guess, based on your knowledge and many years' experience, what impact on behaviors do you think this situation that we all find ourselves in will have?
I think it's alienating. I mean, I think in the long run, it's going to, I mean, if and when this is over, it's promoting distancing. And I'm saying everything, especially my Sicilian background, everything promotes, you know, close encounters with others. As I said, hugging, shaking hands, kissing. But now the pandemic has its own rules, and the rules are no touching, physical distance.
We have to. Sorry about the freezing.
Over. How are young kids? Yeah. If and when the pandemic is over, how are young children who for the past year or several years lived under these social distance guidelines, how will they ever feel comfortable embracing other students, other children? And I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting to see.
That's a horrible thing. Final question to you, Philip. Given what you've studied over all these years, do you believe that any of us in the right situation or the wrong situation is capable of being both good or evil?
I would have to answer yes. That is, we don't like to think of that. We like to think of ourselves as basically good. And I'm saying the Stanford Prison study, the Milgram study, other research says, put in the wrong situation, it could bring out the worst in you. And our job as citizens, our job as psychologists, our job as educators is to create the right situation, which pushes people in the positive direction and blocks them from going in the negative direction. And that's what we need to create a world of caring, compassion, empathy, and make the world better. And it's making the world better in a little way every day. So it's one step at a time, but you know you're going in that direction rather than in that direction.
Professor Philip Zimbardo, that was a fantastic way to finish. I'm very interested that sitting as you do in the center of the world's internet industry on the west coast of America in San Francisco, your connection is so terrible. So it should be the best in the world, but for some reason it isn't. But thank you to everyone that stayed with us despite some of those interruptions. Thank you, Professor Philip Zimbardo, for such a really interesting set of insights. And next year, I'm sure we're going to hear, in the 50th anniversary of your experiment, a lot of coverage in the news. We in Melting Pot have heard from you first. So once again, thank you very much for your time.
Okay. The last thing is, I will send your team the rebuttal I made to the critics, so that maybe your team could send that out to any of the listeners who want to see the details. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Ciao.
Ciao. A virtual hug, a Sicilian virtual hug from London.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.